I was married to Woo-jin Cho for 2 years before I understood the difference between a man who loves you and a man who is simply waiting for someone else to come home. I found out on the worst night of my life, strapped to a hospital bed with a tube down my throat and my skin the colour of old paper, watching my husband walk out of the room with his hand pressed flat against another woman's back, steering her the way you steer something you've steered your whole life without thinking about it. I reached for him. My IV line pulled tight, and the monitor beside me screamed a warning nobody in that hallway turned around for. He didn't turn around either. That's the part I still feel in my teeth some mornings. Not the swelling in my throat. Not the sirens. His shoulders getting smaller down that hallway, and her voice soft enough that he had to lean down to hear it, the way he used to lean down to hear me. My name is Corinne Ashworth. Before I was Mrs. Cho, I was a waitress at a 24-hour diner on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where truckers and lawyers eat eggs at the same counter at 4 in the morning and nobody asks why. From the outside, my marriage looked like a Mafia boss love story people whisper about an Afro-Korean romance story with a dangerous Korean Mafia boss, a working-class black woman, a courthouse ring, and enough money to make every warning look romantic. It was not a billionaire romance. It was an emotional story about what happens when protection becomes permission, and permission becomes control. I want to tell you how I got from that counter to a hospital bed to a boardroom with my own name on the door, and I want you to understand that at every step, somebody told me I did not belong there. Stay with me to the end, because the ending is going to feel like justice, and I want you to earn it alongside me, the same way I had to earn it alone. My grandmother, Odell Ashworth, raised me from 7 in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on housekeeper's wages she never complained about. She got me my first diner job at 19 by walking me in and telling the owner I was the hardest worker he would ever hire. She died 2 years before I met Woo-jin, in a hospital bed not so different from the one I would later occupy. With the last strength in her hands, she pressed an old silver dime into my palm, the one her mother gave her when she left home at 16 with a coat and a bus ticket. "Somebody gave this to me when I had nothing," she said. "So I am giving it to you before you think you have nothing too. Do not let a man's name make you forget you had one first." I pinned it inside my apron the next morning, and kept it there through 2 years of marriage and everything that followed. 4 years ago, a man in a black wool coat sat down at my counter at 11 o'clock at night and ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie he never touched. He had a kind of stillness you don't see on regular men, the kind where a whole room quiets down without knowing exactly why. I didn't know he controlled half the shipping contracts moving through 3 ports on the East Coast. I didn't know grown men called him Sir before they'd even learned his first name. I just knew he tipped $50 on a $4 coffee, and that he came back the next night, and the night after that, until eventually he stopped ordering pie he wasn't going to eat, and just asked me what time I got off. His name was Woo-jin Cho. For the first 6 months I knew him, I genuinely thought he sold something boring, like commercial real estate or shipping insurance. He let me believe that, and I understand now that letting me believe it was its own kind of protection, even if it didn't feel like one later. Our 3rd real date, he took me to a pier at the edge of the city, past midnight, and told me the truth about who his family was in pieces, watching my face after each one like he expected me to run. I didn't run. I asked him if he'd ever hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and he was quiet long enough that I understood the silence was its own kind of honesty. "Not since I had a choice," he said. I chose to believe that meant something. 6 months later, on that same pier, he got down on one knee with no ring box, just his grandmother's ring wrapped in a folded napkin from my own diner, because he said he wanted me to know exactly where he'd fallen for me. I found out what he actually was the night 3 men in dark suits followed us out of a restaurant, and he stepped between me and the street without even looking up from his phone, like protecting me cost him nothing, and came before breathing. Woo-jin was not merely rich, and he was not merely a CEO with a dangerous family name. He was the Korean Mafia boss men called Sir before they knew whether he had come to negotiate or end the conversation. I should have run that night. My grandmother would have told me to run so fast my shoes came off. Instead, I mistook danger directed away from me for safety built around me, And for 2 years, I called that a love story instead of the warning it was. We married quietly at a courthouse downtown, with 2 witnesses off the street, and my grandmother's old silver dime pinned inside the lining of my bouquet, because his mother had made it very clear at our very first dinner that a waitress from a diner counter was not the woman she had raised her only son to bring home. Madame Sonhua Cho looked at me across a table set with more forks than I had ever used in my life, and said, in a voice sweet enough to cut glass, "How resourceful of my son, finding someone so easy to replace." I smiled. I ate my soup. I told myself I only needed to win over one Cho, and I already had him, and that would be enough to carry the rest. The wedding itself lasted 11 minutes, standing in front of a courthouse clerk who'd married 4 other couples that same morning, and didn't once look up from her paperwork long enough to know she was marrying into anything unusual. Tasha stood up for me in a borrowed blazer, crying harder than I was, and Minho Park stood quietly near the back doors for Woo-jin, the only member of his world who came. There was no dress, just my good navy suit from the diner's Sunday shift, and no flowers except the small bouquet Tasha had put together that morning from a corner bodega, my grandmother's dime pinned carefully inside the ribbon where nobody but me would ever know it was there. Woo-jin slid his grandmother's ring onto my finger and told the clerk when she asked if he took me. I took her the first night she poured my coffee and didn't ask who I was. It wasn't the wedding either of us had been raised to expect. It was, for 11 minutes in a fluorescent-lit courthouse hallway, exactly the one I wanted. For a while, it actually was. Woo-jin kept me separate from the business, which I understood as protection rather than shame. He built me the 6-burner kitchen stove I used to admire through appliance store windows and learned exactly how I liked my coffee. He learned my grandmother's name and pronounced Odell correctly the first time, like it mattered. One night, I burned an entire pot of his mother's favorite soup before a family dinner. Instead of calling a caterer, he sat on the kitchen floor with me at midnight, laughing until we cried and eating cereal from the pot because it was the only clean dish left. On nights I missed my grandmother so badly I could not speak. He sat with one hand on my back without trying to fix the grief. He was not easy or soft. Men in his world rarely are. But for 2 years, inside that cold house full of his mother's silences, he felt like enough to build a life on. At the first business dinner he brought me to, 6 weeks after our wedding, I used the wrong fork in a room full of executives and jeweled wives. My face burned. Woo-jin did not correct me. He quietly switched his own fork to match mine and kept eating, so anyone watching would assume he had made the mistake first. Nobody else knew what he had done. I knew. That was the man I married, the one who would rather look foolish beside me than let me look foolish alone. I kept searching for that version of him until the night he let go of my hand in the hospital. Madame Cho made the first year a test I could never officially pass. She corrected how I poured tea, how warmly I spoke to staff, and once replaced an entire dinner service I had selected, so I entered my own dining room and recognized nothing on the table. I cried once in the pantry. Woo-jin found me and said his mother had done the same to every woman who mattered to a man in that family. Surviving her is the test, he said, not winning her over. I did not yet understand what surviving that family would eventually cost. Then Yuna came back from Seoul, and everything I thought I understood about my own marriage turned out to be a rough draft. I want to be fair to her, because for about 11 days, I actually was. Yuna had grown up 2 houses down from the Cho family estate. Their mothers had been close since before either of them could walk, and there had been an understanding, back when Woo-jin was 22 and hadn't yet buried his father, that he and Yuna would eventually marry and merge 2 family fortunes into one name nobody in that world would dare cross. Yuna left for Seoul the same year Woo-jin's father died, right when he needed steadiness the most, and didn't come back for 9 years. I only knew any of this because Madame Cho told me, at length, at a dinner where Yuna sat close enough to Woo-jin that their knees kept brushing under the table, and he kept apologizing to me with his eyes because his mouth was busy being polite to a woman he used to love. Yuna was beautiful in the specific way that makes other women brace themselves before she's even said a word, and she cried beautifully too, which I would come to learn was not a coincidence at all. The story she told, that first week, was that her father had lost everything in a bad partnership and she had nowhere else in the world to go. She looked so small, standing in our foyer with a single suitcase that I offered her the guest wing myself. Woo-jin didn't ask me to. I offered. I need you to remember that part, because later, people tried to tell me I was naive for it, and I wasn't. I was decent, and it turns out decency is not a crime, even though certain families like to punish you for it exactly like it is one. For those first 11 days, I genuinely tried. I took Yuna to lunch at a little cafe near the water, just the two of us, and asked her real questions about Seoul, about her father, about whether she was scared to be back somewhere with so many memories in it. She cried into her tea and told me she'd always wanted a sister, that growing up an only child in a house full of expectations had been lonelier than anyone ever guessed. I remember reaching across the table and squeezing her hand and meaning it. 2 days later, I found out she'd repeated our entire private conversation to Madame Cho, almost word for word, reframed just enough that it sounded like I'd been fishing for information about Woo-jin's finances instead of trying to make a grieving woman feel less alone. That was the day the 11 days ended. Within a month, Yuna had rearranged our entire household without moving a single piece of furniture. She knew Woo-jin's coffee order before I finished making my own. She knew his mother's birthday, the names of every guard on the property, the particular way he liked his tie folded. Every time I walked into a room, she was already sitting in whichever chair I usually took, like she'd arrived a full breath before me on purpose. Small things. A borrowed silk scarf that never came back. A meeting Woo-jin forgot to mention because Yuna had already rescheduled it for him. A comment over breakfast, delivered so lightly I couldn't have repeated it without sounding unhinged, about how I held my fork like I'd learned table manners from a television show. The first time I tried to say something to Woo-jin about it, he laughed, actually laughed, and said I was imagining things, that Yuna had suffered enough without me turning her return into a competition. When I told him I was not competing, I was asking my husband to notice what was happening inside our home. His expression hardened. "I know Yuna," he said. "I trust her. Do not make me choose between comforting an old friend and managing your jealousy." He had already chosen. He just had not yet admitted that choosing not to believe his wife was still a choice. I stood in our bedroom afterward, looking at myself in the mirror, wondering exactly when my instincts had stopped counting as evidence in my own marriage. Then his lieutenant, a quiet, careful man named Minho Park, who had worked for the Cho family since before Woo-jin took over, found me in the garden one evening and said something I've never forgotten. He set down a tray of tea he didn't need to bring me himself and said, "Mrs. Cho, I've watched a great many people come through this house. Miss Rowe does not misplace things. She places them exactly where she wants them found." I asked him why he was telling me this instead of Woo-jin. He looked toward the main house for a long moment before he answered. "Because he still sees the girl who left. I only ever see the woman who came back different." I thanked him. I didn't understand yet how much that sentence would matter, or how much it would eventually cost him to say it out loud in a house where saying the wrong thing about the wrong woman could end a career, or worse. Tell me honestly, if your husband dismissed your instincts to defend the woman he once planned to marry, would you stay quiet to protect the marriage? Or would you leave before the warning became proof? Keep that answer in mind, because mine nearly cost me everything. Yuna's friend Sua Lim began appearing at every luncheon and fitting, always seated before I arrived. Sua could make cruelty sound like concern. During a charity gala fitting, she watched me stand in a half-pinned dress and told Yuna, "It is sweet watching someone work this hard to belong somewhere she was never invited." Yuna laughed and told her to be nice, then explained that honesty was a gift not everyone received gracefully. I smiled because by then I understood that flinching only fed whatever the two of them were building. The first public turn came at the Cho Group Spring Gala, where rival families, judges, reporters, and business partners shared one ballroom. Madame Cho seated Yuna at Woo-jin's right hand and placed me 2 seats away, beside a cousin who repeatedly asked whether I was the help and could bring more wine. A business partner's wife murmured that Woo-jin was letting me play house until the real wife returned. When I stood to correct the place cards, Yuna caught my wrist beneath the tablecloth. "Please do not embarrass him tonight," she whispered. "He needs this room to like him. Not us. Him." She had begun separating our marriage in public sentences, and nobody blinked because the room already saw me as temporary. I did not confront Woo-jin at the gala. I waited until the next morning and found him in his study before his first call, because I still believed a private conversation could rescue what public humiliation had exposed. I told him Yuna had deliberately seated herself beside him, undermined me in front of his partners, and instructed me not to embarrass him inside my own marriage. He did not ask what she had said. He asked why I was determined to turn every room into a test of his loyalty. Then he gave me the sentence that finished what his laughter had started. Yuna was my first love, Corinne. She is part of my family, whether you like it or not. I will not punish her because you feel threatened. I asked whether he was willing to punish me instead. He looked down at the contract on his desk and said, "I need peace in this house." He meant my silence. I told myself I was choosing peace by giving it to him. What I was actually choosing was the version of our marriage in which only one woman's pain was allowed to make noise. 3 weeks later, Yuna collapsed at a family dinner, clutching her chest and gasping that the stress of coming home to find her whole world rearranged was more than her body could carry. Doctors were called before the appetizers were cleared. Madame Cho wept into a linen napkin like it was a performance she had rehearsed. Woo-jin cancelled 2 board meetings and sat beside Yuna for 6 hours. When I suggested a second opinion from a specialist outside the family's usual circle, his mother called my question cruel. Woo-jin did not defend me. He told me Yuna had nearly lost consciousness and asked why compassion seemed so difficult for me whenever she was involved. I apologized for asking a reasonable medical question because that household had trained me to believe my questions cost more than Yuna's tears ever would. There was a second scare at a charity luncheon, conveniently in front of 2 board members Woo-jin needed to impress. He left a 9-figure conversation to hold Yuna's hand while she caught her breath, and I sat alone for 11 minutes counting every episode since her return. The third came during the exact dinner where a rival family was preparing a competing offer on a shipping contract the Chos had held for 30 years. By then, even my determination to be fair could not explain the timing. The doctor was always the same family friend, Dr. Ellery Voss. The symptoms were always dramatic enough to control the room and vague enough to disappear before any independent physician arrived. Each crisis pulled Woo-jin away from business, away from me, or toward whichever public display of devotion Yuna needed next. This was the part of the dark Mafia romance nobody ever puts in the fantasy. Danger does not always enter carrying a weapon. Sometimes it arrives carrying a medical file and crying beautifully. I want to tell you about the exact night it finally broke me, because I have replayed it so many times I could walk you through it with my eyes closed. It was a dinner for the Port Authority Board, the kind of event Woo-jin needed to go absolutely perfectly, because 2 rival shipping families were circling a contract his father had held for 30 years, and the Cho name could not afford to look unsteady in that room, not even for a second. Yuna insisted on helping me get ready that night, said it was a peace offering, said she wanted us to stop circling each other like 2 women fighting over a man who loved us both in different ways. She did my hair herself, her fingers gentle and careful at my temples. She poured me a glass of wine before we left, sweet and cold, and told me to relax, that tonight was going to go beautifully for all of us. I have been severely allergic to shellfish since I was 6 years old. Woo-jin knew. His household staff knew. It was written into the file with every caterer we had used during 2 years of marriage. Yuna knew because I had told her myself during her second week in our home. Over shrimp toast, she slid away from my side of the breakfast table with a considerate smile. The Port Authority menu had been approved in writing without shellfish. My place setting was marked separately. There was no reasonable way for it to reach my plate by accident, and every person at that dinner who mattered to me knew exactly why. 40 minutes into dinner, my throat started closing. The room tilted, and my hand knocked over a wine glass as I reached for Woo-jin's sleeve. Yuna's voice rose before mine could, high and frightened and perfectly controlled, telling the table I had been drinking too quickly, that jealousy made me unstable, that she was sorry she had not watched me more carefully. I forced air around the word allergy, but it came out broken. Woo-jin looked from me to Yuna. She pressed both hands to her chest and whispered, "She threatened to ruin tonight if you sat beside me." He believed her in the exact moment belief mattered most. When Minho shouted for an ambulance and told him my medical file listed anaphylaxis, Woo-jin still turned to Yuna first and asked whether she was all right. By the time the paramedics lifted me onto the gurney, someone had replaced my overturned glass and straightened my chair, as if the room only needed to look correct again for the men deciding whether to sign. They got me to the hospital in time. I lived. I need you to sit with that word for just a second, because for almost 6 hours that night, nobody in that building was sure I would. I woke with a tube down my throat and Madame Cho standing at the foot of my bed, telling her son that a wife who created scenes at contract dinners was an embarrassment the Cho name could not survive twice. Yuna stood beside him, pale and trembling, insisting she had only tried to calm me. Minho was in the hallway, arguing that the caterer's allergy card had disappeared and that the kitchen needed to be secured before anything was cleared. Woo-jin ordered him to stop. I heard my husband say, "There will be no investigation based on Corinne's suspicions. Yuna has suffered enough." Then his mother placed a folder in his hands. I could not read every page from the bed, but I recognized our courthouse date and the line-marked petitioner. Woo-jin signed it while I was awake enough to watch. I reached for him with the hand that was not tethered to a monitor. Woo-jin looked at my fingers, then at my face, swollen and barely mine. For 1 second, I saw the man who had once switched forks, so I would not look foolish alone. Then Yuna whispered that she could not breathe in that room, and he placed his hand against her back. He chose his first love while his wife was fighting to stay alive. He walked her into the hallway without turning around, carrying the signed petition beneath his arm. The last thing I heard before the door closed was Madame Cho saying, "Let her sleep. By the time she wakes properly, this will be cleaner for everyone." I did not sleep it off. I spent 3 days learning that Woo-jin had personally authorized the dissolution, frozen my access to the marital accounts, and instructed his staff to pack my belongings before a specialist had even cleared me to speak. The petition cited irreconcilable instability, evidenced by repeated public misconduct. When Minho tried to show him photographs of shrimp shells hidden beneath a folded napkin at my place and a copy of the altered catering order, Woo-jin suspended him for disloyalty and refused to open the file. That detail matters. He was not merely manipulated by his mother or seduced by an old memory. He was given a door toward the truth and chose not to walk through it. Later, the hotel's security archive would show Yuna entering the service corridor with my place card in her hand. Later, laboratory testing would find shellfish protein inside the sauce served only at my seat. Later, her messages with Dr. Voss would explain exactly how she planned to make an allergic reaction resemble drunken instability. But on the night his belief could have protected me, my husband selected the version of events that protected her. I left the hospital with a suitcase Woo-jin's staff had packed, a settlement check I never cashed, and a silence in my chest where my marriage used to sit. His signature was on the final instruction releasing my belongings from the estate. I folded that page inside the envelope with the check, not because I wanted the money, but because I needed one permanent reminder that abandonment had not happened around him. He had approved it. My grandmother's silver dime was still pinned inside the lining of my old work apron at the bottom of the suitcase, the one possession nobody thought to take because nobody knew it mattered. I returned to the only place that had ever been honestly mine. Tasha met me at my old apartment with a key she had kept and did not ask a single question that first night. She made up the pull-out couch and sat beside me until I slept, the way Woo-jin once had, except she never let go of my hand to follow somebody else out of the room. I put the apron back on 3 days later. I picked up a double shift at the diner 2 nights after they discharged me, hands still shaking so badly. I dropped a full pot of coffee my second hour back, throat still raw enough that talking hurt, and I poured coffee for truckers and lawyers and told myself the same thing my grandmother used to say whenever the world tried to make her small. Get quiet, get sharp, and let them find out the hard way. Here is what nobody in that family knew, because I never told them. Because some things you build quietly, in your own name, on purpose, for exactly a day like this one. During those 2 years of marriage, while I sat through dinners where people treated me like part of the centerpiece, I was not merely decorating a room I did not feel welcome in. My grandmother left me $11,000, every cent earned cleaning other people's homes for 40 years, and made me promise that no man's money would make me forget how to build something of my own. So I had built quietly. In my own name, with my own savings and a business plan written on diner napkins during slow shifts, I seeded a ghost kitchen delivery company called Nightingale. It began with 3 rented ovens, 1 delivery app contract, and Tasha Odom running the kitchen after finishing culinary school at night. Woo-jin never asked where I went 2 afternoons each week. He assumed shopping or spa appointments because that explanation fit the wife he thought he had married. The truth was supplier contracts, food cost models, customer data, and a folding table in Tasha's garage where we argued over delivery maps until we fell asleep sitting up. The strong black woman his family considered unqualified for their boardroom had been learning how to build her own before any of them thought to look. Nightingale had 12 locations and a modest but steadily climbing following the week I got discharged from that hospital with nothing but a suitcase and a silence. By the time I had been back at the diner 3 months, working my old shift because it was the only rhythm steady enough to let me breathe again, Nightingale had signed with 2 national delivery platforms, and I had deliberately, carefully kept my own name off every single piece of press, because a woman leaving a very public divorce with nothing to her name is a much smaller, safer target than a woman who has just quietly won. 5 months into rebuilding, the business was growing, and I still felt numb. I went to my grandmother's grave in my diner clothes and told her everything: the marriage, the humiliation, the hospital, and the shame I felt for forgetting what she taught me. I stayed until dark. I did not leave healed, but I remembered whose granddaughter I was. The next morning, I worked my full shift with her dime pinned inside my apron, and from that day forward, I never felt guilty for what I built next. Tasha found me refilling ketchup bottles on a slow Tuesday and said a private equity group wanted to purchase 35% of Nightingale for a valuation of $240 million. I stood inside the walk-in cooler, apron smelling like bacon grease, and did the math twice because the first answer looked like a number from Woo-jin's world, not mine. I accepted after Renata negotiated voting protection, founder control, and a clause preventing any investor from selling to a Cho-affiliated company without my written approval. I kept 65% and became controlling owner and executive chair. 3 weeks after the ink dried, I changed Nightingale's public name to Ashworth House. If I was going to build an empire with my own hands, it would carry my grandmother's name into rooms she had spent her life cleaning but had never been invited to enter as a guest. 8 months after the divorce, a regional business magazine featured Nightingale among the country's fastest-growing delivery brands. The reporter wanted the founder's photograph. I sent Tasha instead. When she asked why the owner of record would not appear, I said I had endured enough headlines written by other people and preferred to let the numbers introduce me when I was ready. The article ran without my face. Reading it at the diner counter, I felt something stronger than pride. Proof that what I built could stand on merit without the Cho name explaining it. Ashworth House went from 12 locations to 86 in 14 months, then crossed 140 locations before our 2nd anniversary. A national hospitality group valued us at $820 million, which made my controlling stake worth more than $500 million on paper before I turned 35. That is the number people repeat when they call this an inspirational story or a life lesson about revenge. The number I remember is 11,000, because that was what Odell Ashworth left me after 40 years of work. Nothing about the growth was luck. It was 2 years of watching wealthy people become bored with the same 5 restaurants, learning what made old money spend new money, and recognizing what they wanted before they knew how to ask. I learned negotiation from Woo-jin's calls, discipline from the diner, and patience from being underestimated at every table. Everything his family thought had been wasted on me became capital. I used to build a company they could not enter without an appointment. Eventually, rumors reached us through former Cho staff. Yuna's medical episodes had never produced consistent monitor results. Dr. Voss signed every questionable report. 2 employees had resigned after being told to remove reminders of my allergy from printed menus. I did not mistake rumors for evidence, but I recognized a pattern. This time, I would not enter a powerful room carrying only the truth. I would enter carrying proof. I sat with the rumors for a long time because I knew what happens to a black woman who accuses a powerful family's chosen daughter without an army of proof behind her. So I built the army first. Ashworth House's counsel, Renata Cole, listened to the entire story and then asked the question that changed the investigation. Is this about getting your husband back or preventing them from doing this to the next woman? I told her I did not want him back. I wanted the truth placed somewhere his family could not buy, threaten, or charm it out of existence. Renata hired an independent investigator under the legitimate cover of due diligence for a Port Authority hospitality contract. We subpoenaed archived kitchen access logs through the board's compliance process, preserved the hotel's security footage before its retention deadline, obtained the caterer's original and altered menus, and identified a payment from Yuna's private account to a consulting company controlled by Dr. Voss. Minho, still suspended, provided time-stamped photographs and the copy of the file Woo-jin had refused to read. A former housekeeper agreed to testify that Yuna ordered allergy reminders removed from printed menus while pretending they had been misplaced. We did not confront anyone. We built paper, video, witnesses, and a chain of custody strong enough to survive the Cho family's lawyers. What came back after 4 months was colder than I expected. The security footage showed Yuna entering the service corridor with my place card, opening the covered tray assigned to my seat, and leaving less than a minute later. Laboratory records from the hospital confirmed shellfish protein in residue preserved from my clothing. The signed catering amendment added shellfish sauce to one plated course after the allergy-safe menu had been approved, and Yuna's electronic signature was attached at 9:14 that morning. Her messages with Dr. Voss discussed which symptoms could be dismissed as alcohol, how quickly swelling might appear, and whether Woo-jin would believe jealous behavior if the room heard that explanation first. Bank records showed Voss receiving $80,000 through a shell company. A separate financial trail proved Yuna's father had not lost his fortune in a bad partnership. She had drained his accounts for 3 years and returned because she needed the Cho name and Cho money more than she had ever needed Woo-jin's heart. Before I tell you what happened when I walked back into that ballroom, answer one question. Was Woo-jin another victim of Yuna's manipulation, or did refusing clear evidence make him responsible for what followed? Write say haste if you believe silence can become betrayal. I did not do what happened next for Woo-jin. This was not a revenge romance designed to make a Korean mafia boss fall in love with me again, and it was not one of those mafia boss stories where cruelty is erased by one grand apology. Yuna poisoned me in my own home, controlled the explanation while I could not breathe, and used my husband's power to remove me before I could defend myself. Woo-jin signed the papers and refused the evidence. I wanted consequences, not reconciliation. More importantly, 3 Port Authority members were preparing to award a decade-long contract to a family whose preferred future daughter-in-law had falsified medical records, bribed a physician, and manipulated a public business event. I would not stay quiet for people who had never once considered staying quiet for me. By then, Ashworth House had become the exclusive hospitality partner for the same kind of gala where the Cho family once seated me like borrowed furniture. The invitation for the annual Port Authority dinner arrived almost 1 year after I had been carried from that ballroom on a stretcher. It was addressed to Corinne Ashworth, founder, controlling owner, and executive chair of Ashworth House, requesting that I personally host the evening at which the board would announce its new 10-year hospitality and shipping partnerships. Madame Cho's event planner had booked my company 8 months earlier without understanding who controlled it. Woo-jin's office had also submitted a final bid dependent on Ashworth House, providing executive dining across 3 ports. He did not know the woman he had removed from his home, now controlled a contract his empire needed. I entered the ballroom in a wine-coloured dress, on my own feet, and flanked by my own executives. The board chairman stepped onto the stage before Yuna could cross the room and introduced me as the founder whose company had grown from 3 rented ovens into a national hospitality group valued at $820 million. The same guests who once asked whether I was the help stood to applaud. Woo-jin did not. He stared at me as if the room had shifted beneath him. Madame Cho's champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Yuna recovered first. She smiled, walked directly to the stage, and told the chairman there had been an unfortunate misunderstanding that I was Woo-jin's unstable former wife, that my presence might compromise the integrity of the evening, and that Ashworth House should appoint someone less personally involved. She made the same mistake she had made in my home. She tried to control the explanation before I could speak. I took the microphone and asked the chairman whether the board wanted the personal answer or the compliance answer. He said both. The personal answer was that Yuna had nearly killed me at this event 1 year earlier and blamed the reaction on jealousy. The compliance answer was waiting in the sealed folders already placed before every voting member. The screens behind us displayed the original allergy-safe menu beside the version altered under Yuna's electronic signature. Then came the security footage. Yuna entering the service corridor, lifting the cover from my assigned tray, and leaving with my place card turned face down in her hand. The room went so quiet I heard someone set down a fork. Dr. Voss moved toward the exit. 2 independent investigators from the hospital board met him at the doors. Renata read the payment record and the message in which Yuna asked whether swelling could be dismissed as drunken panic if Woo-jin heard that explanation first. Yuna turned toward him then, not toward me. "Tell them you know me," she said. "Tell them Corinne has always been jealous." Woo-jin looked at the evidence, then at Minho standing beside the chairman with the file he had once refused to open. Minho said, calmly, "Sir, I brought you the first proof while your wife was still hospitalized. You suspended me for it." That was the moment the regret reached him, not when he learned I was wealthy, but when the entire room learned he had been offered the truth and chosen Yuna instead. The chairman did not let Woo-jin disappear into silence. He asked him, in front of every director and reporter in the ballroom, whether Minho had delivered evidence while I was hospitalized. Woo-jin looked at me before he answered, and I could see him searching my face for mercy I no longer owed him. "Yes," he said. The chairman asked whether he had opened it. "No." He asked whether Woo-jin had signed the dissolution before an independent doctor reviewed my condition. "Yes." Each answer was quieter than the last, but the microphones carried every one. Yuna stepped between them and said Woo-jin had been protecting his family from a jealous wife. I pressed the remote once more. Her own message appeared behind us. "He will believe me, if make her look, UN stable first." Under it was Dr. Voss's reply confirming the dosage and timing. Yuna's composure finally broke. She accused the investigators of altering records, accused Minho of revenge, accused me of building Ashworth House only to destroy her. I told her the company existed before she returned, before she entered my home, and before she mistook my kindness for weakness. "You did not create my power," I said. "You only created the day I stopped hiding it." The board's security team closed the doors. Cameras turned from me to her. Woo-jin reached toward my arm as if instinct could rewrite history, then stopped before touching me. For once, he understood that my body, my business, and my future were no longer places he could enter without permission. Madame Cho tried to approach me after the board ordered the Cho bid paused and formally referred the evidence to prosecutors, hospital regulators, and its own ethics council. Her voice was low enough that the room could not hear it break. "You built all this," she said. I told her I had built it, which was a different sentence from inheriting it and a truer one. She glanced toward the executives, waiting for my approval, the chairman thanking my counsel, and the guests who had once treated me like temporary staff. For the first time since we met, she had to decide whether cruelty was still safe. She chose careful. "I underestimated you," she said. I told her she had not underestimated me. She had refused to look at me closely enough to make an estimate at all. That was the nearest thing to an apology I expected from her, and neither of us pretended it repaired anything. Woo-jin found me after the board recessed, beside the dessert table where a man in a black wool coat had once ordered pie he never touched. He looked older than 1 year should have made him. "Tell me the company is yours," he said. I told him 65% of it was mine, along with the controlling vote, the port contract, and every decision his bid now depended on. He closed his eyes for a second, but I did not let money become the center of what he had lost. I handed him the copy of the petition he signed beside my hospital bed and the photograph of Minho's unopened file on his desk. "This is the part you keep," I said. "Not the valuation, not the ballroom. This." He said he had replayed that hospital room every day and kept imagining a version where he turned around. I told him there was no other version. There was the one where he chose his first love while I was dying, and the one where I survived his choice. He asked whether I could forgive him. I told him I already had, because I refused to carry him inside my anger forever. Then I said forgiveness was not an invitation back into my life. He had mistaken my love for a resource that would remain available whenever he finally looked up. It was not available anymore. The board's review moved quickly because the evidence did not depend on gossip. Dr. Voss lost his hospital privileges, then his license, after investigators confirmed falsified records, concealed payments, and coordination with Yuna. Prosecutors charged Yuna with evidence tampering, fraud, and aggravated assault connected to the deliberate contamination of my meal. Her lawyers negotiated the legal process for months, but no family influence could erase the footage or the digital trail. The Cho Group was not charged with her conduct, yet its port bid was suspended because Woo-jin had overridden an internal warning and blocked preservation of evidence while acting as chief executive. That consequence mattered. His decision had not only destroyed our marriage, it had exposed his company to risk. The board required independent compliance oversight before considering any future Cho contract. Ashworth House received the 10-year hospitality partnership unanimously. The announcement came before dessert. The chairman said our company had demonstrated the transparency, operational discipline, and leadership the board expected from every partner. I stood beneath the same chandeliers where people had watched me leave on a stretcher and signed the contract with my grandmother's dime inside my evening bag. I did not smile at Yuna when officers escorted her out. I did not look at Woo-jin when reporters surrounded him. The power reversal was not that they finally feared me. It was that their fear no longer controlled what I did next. Within 6 months, Ashworth House expanded into airport lounges, private rail service, and executive dining across 4 ports. Our valuation crossed $1 billion after a second funding round in which I sold nothing and surrendered no control. Society pages that had once called me Woo-jin Cho's unsuitable wife now called me one of the youngest black women to build a national hospitality company from the ground up. I corrected them only once. Tasha and I built it together. Her name belonged in every version of the story. A real inspirational story does not erase the hands that held you up while everyone else was deciding whether to let you fall. Madame Cho called exactly once after the review ended. She did not apologize. Women like her often confuse restraint with innocence. She asked whether Ashworth House would consider hosting future Cho functions because, in her words, our standards had always been higher than the family gave me credit for. I told her my office would evaluate any proposal under the same terms as every other client: full payment in advance, independent compliance, and no private access to me. We accepted one corporate event 6 months later at triple the old rate. I did not attend. There is peace in being needed by people who once called you replaceable, but there is greater peace in knowing an employee can handle the room while you spend your evenings somewhere you are loved. Woo-jin still appeared at industry functions, always standing slightly apart from the crowd the way he had before he sat at my diner counter 4 years earlier. He requested one conversation without lawyers, mothers, or anyone else to translate his regret. I agreed because closure is not the same as access. We met in the back of one of my restaurants with 2 chipped diner mugs between us. He asked whether any version of our story ended with us finding our way back. I told him no. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just clearly. The woman who loved him had begged him to believe her while she could still speak, and he had demanded silence. The woman sitting across from him could forgive that frightened younger version of herself for staying, and she could forgive him enough not to hate him, but she would not rebuild a marriage on top of the place where he had abandoned her. He nodded for a long time before saying he understood. Then he admitted that understanding was not the same as surviving the answer. I told him that was one of the life lessons lost teaches without asking permission. Minho no longer works for the Cho family. The board's investigation restored his reputation, and Ashworth House hired him to lead corporate security after I made certain the offer came from Tasha rather than me, so he could accept it without feeling he had traded one loyalty for another. He keeps the first photograph he took at that dinner in a locked evidence archive, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that instinct matters only when someone is brave enough to preserve proof. I know the woman who married Woo-jin at a courthouse with a silver dime pinned inside her bouquet does not exist anymore. She did not die in the hospital. She became the foundation for someone stronger. By every measure that once mattered to the Cho family, I became the richest woman Woo-jin ever lost. Some nights that tastes like victory. Some nights it still tastes like grief. Maturity was learning that both could sit at the same table without either one sending me back to him. What I know for certain is this: I will never again apologize for asking a reasonable question. I will never mistake another person's comfort for peace, and I will never shrink myself small enough to fit into a chair placed 2 seats away from where I belong. Love should not require a woman to surrender her evidence, her instincts, her money, or her name. Any romance drama that asks her to do that is not love. It is erasure wearing expensive clothes. I still visit the diner on quiet Sunday mornings, not because I need the shift, but because a 19-year-old woman named Priya started working there last year, nervous and sharp-eyed in the way I used to be. I show her how to carry 4 plates on one arm the way my grandmother taught me. Last month she asked whether it was true that I once worked there full-time, whether the stories about the owner who used to be one of us were real. I told her every word was true, and that the only thing that changed was what I chose to build during the hours nobody was watching. I gave her the advice Odell gave me. Keep something of your own growing quietly, no matter who you love or how safe that love feels. Not because every love story fails, because a woman who exists only inside another person's house is always one bad night away from being asked to leave it. Priya nodded, then showed me the online bookkeeping course she had enrolled in without telling anyone. I bought her first laptop through an Ashworth House scholarship and made her promise she would someday do the same for another woman. If you have made it this far, you know this did not end with another wedding, a soft reunion, or a Korean Mafia romance pretending regret cancels betrayal. It ended with a woman who nearly died reaching for a husband who let go, then used that same hand to sign contracts, open kitchens, employ thousands of people, and build an empire no one could remove her from. Somewhere in a house I no longer live in, there may still be a seating chart with my name written 2 chairs too far from where I belonged. I no longer need Madame Cho to keep it as a reminder. My grandmother's silver dime sits framed on my desk beneath a small brass plate that reads Odell ASHWORTH, First Investor. Beside it is the unsigned settlement check Woo-jin sent to the hospital, and beside that is the first Ashworth House contract I signed as controlling owner. Visitors usually notice the billion-dollar company logo on the wall before they notice the coin. I always notice the coin first. It reminds me that power did not begin when wealthy people learned my name. It began when one working woman gave another working woman proof that she had a name worth protecting. That is where I started. That is how far I carried it. And that is why the richest thing Woo-jin Cho ever lost was never my company. It was the woman who would once have shared all of it with him.